relations, and most recently is very interested in the relationship between religious affiliations and religious politics and international relations, both in Brazil and throughout the world. He's written about Israel and Palestine in that context, and of course is very interested in Bolsonaro seen through that lens. And so Guilherme's publications are extensive. He really has made some very important contributions in all of those areas. And he also has a really interesting Twitter feed for those of you that like to follow any of these topics online. So I encourage you to look up the work, but I don't want to take too much of our precious time with my own words, because I think Guilherme will have much more to say to all of us about the present situation in Brazil and the international dimensions of it. So thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you so much, Guilherme, for gracing us with this.
So I'll be standing for most of my presentation because there's so many people in the back. It's a privilege to be here. I'm so happy. I'm living in Ann Arbor now for some months, so I had a chance to come and practice. So amazing service. Everything is so great so far. It is the second time I come to Chicago, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. So the topic of my presentation is how Bolsonaro represents more than just a populist or a conservative leader. I'll be talking about the role of religion and religious nationalism so we can make sense of Bolsonaro's politics. And I'm going to zoom in on the debate in foreign policy, which is pretty much what I've been doing research on for the last 15 years. So I'm pretty much interested on the implications of religion in foreign policy. But it's not so much about the role of, for example, evangelical groups in foreign policy. I'm looking at it from a broader religious nationalism perspective, which is particularly something that's been on in the debates of democracy and politics all around the world. Hungary, India, Poland, the Philippines, we have the same sort of discussions. Even in the U.S., I'd say there is religious nationalism discussion going on. So, and that's why I decided to name my presentation as Bolsonaro's Metapolitical Crusade for a new Brazilian identity. So that pretty much sums up my argument. Bolsonaro's actually trying to come up with a new Brazilian identity. More than just a liberal or an anti-corruption man, he's trying to become the beacon of a new religious identity. So I'm going to organize my presentation in 4 parts. The first part will be a very short discussion on competing interpretations of Bolsonaro's rise to power. Why did he get elected in the first place? I think that's a very interesting discussion to begin with. Then I'm going to move on to the discussion of the nuts and bolts of Bolsonaro's metapolitical game, which is the core of my argument. And then I'm going to move on to discuss the relationship between metapolitics and foreign policy in Brazil. And finally, I'll wrap it up with a discussion about the implications for the future. So, the first question that I'm always asked, that I always try to answer whenever I'm thinking about Bolsonaro is how and why did he get elected in the first place? So, what is behind the Bolsonaro phenomenon? And basically, if we ask people, common sense has it that Bolsonaro was elected either because he embodied the anti-workers' party sentiment that was all around Brazil's, the Brazilian society back ever since 2014 or 2015, and then Bolsonaro was able to become the spokesman of this anti-PT or anti-workers' party sentiment. Right? This is commonly referred to as the anti-petismo hypothesis, which is pretty much something if you've been following the news and reading about it, even scholars, they focus, especially in one side, they focus a lot on the role of anti-petismo to explain Bolsonaro's rise to power. Then there is a second hypothesis, which I personally find a bit more compelling, which has to do with the fact that he got elected not just because of the Workers' Party or the anti-Workers' Party sentiment, but because he outspokenly opposed the political establishment as a whole, right? For those of you who speak Portuguese, you probably heard Bolsonaro saying, tem que mudar tudo isso aí. Tá ok. It's a no right sort of expression that he very often uses. So the second hypothesis is a little bit broader than the first one because it refers to the establishment as a whole. And I would say that as much as Trump here in the US, Bolsonaro, he boosted his popularity on anti-establishment grounds. So I think it's very important to look at these two things. Obviously, these two hypotheses do not cancel each other out. I mean, they complement each other somehow. And they help us understand, for example, the role of Paulo Guedes as the representative of economic liberalism in the government, and at the same time, Sérgio Moro as the Minister of Justice, as a representative of the anti-corruption fight or the tough on crime positions of Bolsonaro's administration. And then there's a third hypothesis, which I personally, that's my own hypothesis. Obviously, I've been talking to a lot of people about it. This has been overlooked for a long time. People sort of didn't really see the religious aspect of Bolsonaro coming around the corner. And then when Bolsonaro ran for president, I mean, when he decided to run as of mid-2016, early 2017, that became a staple of his campaign rhetoric. The idea that he would transform or he would restore Brazil's Christian identity. The idea that you have the nation, but at the same time, and even more importantly than the nation in itself, you have religion and God, and especially Christianity. I mean, he's not talking about Judaism, he's not talking about Islam, he's pretty much thinking of Brazil in a Christian nationalist perspective, right? So he's been talking a lot about it. And my hypothesis goes as he got elected because he offered Brazilians a new relationship between religion, society, and the state. And that's the religious nationalist hypothesis. That's pretty much what I've been working on for some months now. And I'd say that this is an interesting way to look at it, not just because it sheds light on why he got elected in the first place, but it also sheds light on the subsequent support of Bolsonaro's policies. Because as you've probably seen, I mean, he's faltering. When it comes to economic policies, for example, there's so many ebbs and flows. I mean, you can see that he's a liberal, or at least Paulo Guedes is a liberal, but there's so many discussions on or over illiberal policies that he's trying to push as Fundação, which is the electoral fund, many statist policies that sometimes they get mixed up with the liberal policies. So it's pretty much of an inconsistent platform when it comes to the economy. And when it comes to fighting corruption or fighting the establishment or fighting crime, the impression that I have, and it's very personal, is that Bolsonaro only replaced one way of doing corruption for another way of doing corruption, which is pretty much the petty little tiny corruption that has to do with the family ties, has to do with the militia in Rio, has to do with some other aspects of corruption. Of course, he sees himself as an honest man, right? I have no doubts about it. So does Lula probably. So, but he sees himself as a very honest person because what he does, for example, trying to appoint his own son as Brazil's ambassador to the United States, this is not seen as corruption. This is seen as a natural extension of my family's interests, and my permanence in power. So I think he might see himself as an honest person, and I have no doubt about it. But the thing here is, both anti-PT and anti-establishment hypotheses, they fall short of looking at this deeper aspects of the Brazilian society, which has to do with religion, first of all. So I say that most of his religious nationalist constructions, ever since he got to power, help explain why we have something around 30% of Brazil who still supports him and wholeheartedly supports him, right? So they do not challenge anything he does, right? And this is very present even among family members. And talk to people, why do you like him? Well, I like him because he encapsulates everything that I believe in and so on and so forth. And I'd say that there is a very strong religious aspect to it, so that's my whole point. And of course, when I speak of religious nationalism, many people could almost immediately think that we're talking about evangelicals. Evangelicals have become a major force in Brazilian politics in the last 2 decades. But I think it goes well beyond the evangelical vote or the evangelical support in Congress, for example. I'd say that it refers to a broader and deeper set of conservative values that are pretty much the platform of the Brazilian society ever since Brazil was created in the first place. So my idea here is that Bolsonaro, more than a former military man, more than somebody who's been flirting with liberalism, he's above all a culture warrior. So that's the most, or one of the most, if not the most important aspect of his political dynamics, right? So that's what I've been looking at. And I think that some of the things that he has been saying ever since he started his campaign are quite telling in this regard. So, for example, he said this as early as February 2017, I mean, it was 1.5 years before actual elections took place in Brazil. And he said, "We are a Christian country, God is above all, we must end this nonsense of a secular state. It is, or Brazil is, a Christian state. We'll make Brazil for the majority, minorities must bow to majorities. Either they adapt or they disappear." And this is quite telling because he is repeating this set of ideas over and over again, and even today, when he talks about minority politics, when he talks about religion, that's the let's say backbone of his approach to politics and to democratic politics, so to speak. He thinks about democracy as majority versus the minority, not majorities and minorities altogether. And one of the most visible representatives of Bolsonaro's religious nationalist drive is his foreign ministry. This is why I'm going to talk about foreign policy in a minute. His foreign minister is called Ernesto Araújo. He's a career diplomat. People from our diplomatic service became very happy. We're very happy when Ernesto Araújo was appointed. By appointing a career diplomat, Brazilian diplomatic traditions will be safeguarded. But that's not exactly what happened. Ernesto Araújo was appointed in the first place because he is probably the most Christian minister of all ministers of the Bolsonaro cabinet. And he's been talking about it explicitly and very eloquently at times. And this is his personal blog. He opened up this blog weeks before the first round of elections in 2018. The name's quite suggestive, right? Metapolitical 17, Metapolitics 17. 17 was the number of Bolsonaro's candidacy in the ballot. So it's a very clear reference to that. And he describes himself, and that's a very curious thing. I've translated it for you. I'm Ernesto Araújo. I've been a public official for 28 years, and I'm also a writer. I want to help Brazil and the world get rid of the globalist ideology. You've probably heard of globalism before. It has become a very strong conspiracy theory in the US as well. Globalism is economic globalization that is now being driven by cultural Marxism. So that's an anti-Gramsci way to look at it. It is essentially an anti-human and anti-Christian, anti-human and anti-Christian. Nowadays, faith in Christ means fighting globalism, whose ultimate goal is to break the bond between God and man, making man a slave and God irrelevant. The Metapolitical project essentially means opening up for God's presence in politics and in history. And he said this before the elections, and the blog is still online, so you can access it metapoliticabrasil.com. So that's pretty much his position and his worldviews about the role of religion in politics. And this is an article. He was appointed in November 2018. He took when Bolsonaro took office in January. So, and that's why Araújo published a piece in a magazine called The New Criterion, which is a very conservative magazine, by the way. And it's called Now We Do. And basically, what I want to highlight here is this passage. he says that my detractors have called me crazy for believing in God and for believing that God acts in history, but I don't care. God is back, and the nation is back. A nation with God, God through the nation. In Brazil, at least, nationalism became the vehicle of faith. Faith became the catalyst of nationalism, and they both have ignited an exhilarating wave of freedom and new possibilities. And this is the reason why many people call him a Knight Templar, right? And it's curious because if you go to his Twitter accounts, he follows just a few people, I'd say 90 people, which is unusual for members of the government. But he follows some news agency accounts. He follows, of course, his fellow cabinet colleagues and Bolsonaro's account as well, the Sons and everything. And he follows a number of Templar Knights accounts, fake accounts. They usually spread fake news, you know, the honey badger theory and all these alt-right things. So he's a follower of the alt-right elite of Brazil, which is quite telling because the alt-right is also related to this religious ideas in Brazil. I was talking to Brody yesterday about this, and one thing that I've been telling a lot of people about, and I think it's pretty true, is that Brazil, well, we have our own alt-right, which is represented by some ideological members of the Bolsonaro cabinet. But the difference between the U.S. alt-right and Brazilian alt-right is that in the U.S., the alt-right, especially the most radical fringes of the alt-right, they talk a lot about white supremacism. In Brazil, there's no such thing as a white supremacist discourse for obvious reasons, so people have translated the white supremacist positions into religious or Christian supremacist positions. And this is why the Templars, they have a very important role in this image of a new Brazil. So before politics comes metapolitics. That's the core, as I said, of my argument. So what is metapolitics about? Have you guys ever heard of this expression before, metapolitics? It's a central concept of the alt-right movement. The idea that before playing the political game, playing the congressional game, playing the executive-legislative relations game, you have to change a country's or a society's culture. So politics is irrelevant if you don't change culture first. This is why I call Bolsonaro a cultural warrior in the first place. So metapolitics is a strategy to disseminate and anchor a particular set of cultural ideas, attitudes, and values in the society. And in our case, in the alt-right's case, as opposed to the prevalent or prevailing left-wing narratives. The idea and the goal is to lay the groundwork for deeper political change. And that's, as I said, that has become a central concept for the alt-right and for the alt-right political philosophy. Right? There are some books about it, very interesting ones, including Mark Sedgwick books, 2019. And following Carl Schmitt's political theory, Carl Schmitt, for those who don't know him, is one of the jurists of the Nazi regime back in the 1930s. And Carl Schmitt is a prominent political theorist whose main thesis basically defines politics as a struggle between friends and enemies. So politics is not about cooperating, about bringing people together. Politics is predominantly about destroying the enemy and finding out where friends are so you can destroy the enemy. So following Carl Schmitt's political theory, and there's a very interesting connection between today's metapolitical discussions and Carl Schmitt's theory from the 1930s. Metapolitics would enable the emerging political elites and the masses as an outcome to redefine through new cultural standards friends and enemies of the nation. Right? So this is a central element of Bolsonaro's politics. In Bolsonaro, in himself, he represents the translation of the metapolitical warfare into actual political power, which corresponds in political terms to the forging of a whole new liberal conservative alliance in Brazil. And this is something that politicians in the past have fallen short of doing. Bolsonaro could successfully put together liberals and conservatives in the same cabinet, and so far it's been quite successful. And one of the reasons for Bolsonaro's success is certainly WhatsApp, because in a time of live streams, live Facebook videos, and WhatsApp messages, Bolsonaro has been using these instruments very intelligently. I'd say that he's a master of social networks. I don't like to call him a master of anything, but let's put it this way. He's probably the politician who understood the changing logics of political communication before everybody else in Brazil. And you can tell it by the number of followers he had on Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram well before Ciro Gomes, Lula, and any other politician in the country. So metapolitics, the metapolitical game, it resonates with people through WhatsApp. That's the main point here. Now, since we're talking about friends and enemies, who are Brazil's new friends and who are the enemies? Basically, these are the four groups that together help us understand Bolsonaro's cabinet and administration as a whole. We have free market liberals represented by Economy Minister Paulo Guedes, anti-corruption activists represented by Justice and Public Security Minister Sérgio Moro, religious conservatives, and their most visible face is the evangelical base or caucus in Congress. Here, this is a picture of Silas Malafaia, one of the most prominent evangelical pastors, neo-Pentecostal pastors in Brazil, and military patriots, represented by the 9 or 10 military members of Bolsonaro's cabinet, most of whom are generals or top-ranked military. So this is the logic of Brazil's friends, and this is how Bolsonaro was able to hold everybody together with his campaign slogan, right? Brazil above everything, God above everyone. This is something that he has been repeating up until today. That was a campaign slogan, but he brought it to his administration as well. And who are Brazil's new enemies? Unlike other times in which you could even describe somebody as an enemy, but you wouldn't like to destroy the enemy in the battlefield, nowadays Bolsonaro is waging a war on a number of different political actors or political groups. And these are the three basic enemies of Bolsonaro's administration. The political establishment. So very often I'm a member of some pro-Bolsonaro WhatsApp groups. We receive messages or memes sometimes criticizing the Supreme Court, criticizing the President of the Supreme Court, criticizing the Congress, the President of the Congress, and so on and so forth. And very often we find messages such as Bolsonaro has to shut down Congress or has to shut down the Supreme Court. And there's an article of Brazil's Constitution, which is Article 142, that allegedly allows Bolsonaro to do it in face of a major political crisis, but this is not true. I mean, no jurist in Brazil would support this kind of interpretation, that there's a constitutional article that allows the executive to rule over other powers, other branches of power. But the political establishment is one of the faces of Bolsonaro's new enemies. And then we have a whole group of social justice warriors. That's become a very common expression in U.S. politics, especially ever since Obama, I'd say. Sometimes with positive connotation, sometimes with a very derogatory connotation. And the idea here is that all activists from all areas, human rights, environment, anybody who might be identified with the left is an enemy. And the thing here is that Bolsonaro is trying to enlarge, through revealing his narrative over and over again, he's trying to enlarge the number of people who might be considered left-wing in Brazil. So people otherwise understood as liberals, as center, even right of center in Brazil, they are now being labeled as left-wingers or new left. There are some expressions on Twitter that have become pretty popular. And obviously, the main face of social justice warrior, even combined with the political establishment, is Lula, who's the arch enemy of Bolsonaro in this new way of looking at Brazilian politics. And finally, we have the traditional social gatekeepers. One of the, and this is part of the authoritarian playbook in many other countries in the world. The idea that one of the ways to be able to secure political control in the country, especially in an authoritarian setting, is by doing away with the professional or traditional press. So many newspapers in Brazil are being just openly criticized. Bolsonaro sometimes scolds journalists publicly. So he refers to somebody's mother on a live broadcast. He tells a journalist to shut up in the middle of an audience, and so on and so forth. So that has become a very strong element of Bolsonaro's way of dealing with journalists. And every time he confronts either social justice warriors or journalists or the political establishment, he refers to a biblical verse, which is John 8:32. You've probably heard about it before. He's very often talking about it. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. E sabereis a verdade vos libertará, or something like that. So that's something that Bolsonaro repeats very often. Now, who's the mastermind of all this strategy? Bolsonaro wouldn't be able to think about all these things by himself. He needs somebody, he needs an ideologue, he needs somebody to help him shape the strategy of metapolitics in Brazil. And the most important figure in this metapolitical struggle is a man called Olavo de Carvalho, who's a self-proclaimed philosopher. He's got an extensive work on philosophy, Aristotle, modern philosophy, and he was a commentator of some newspapers back in the 1990s, so he talks a lot about politics too. And since he's got no undergrad degree, I'd say that he didn't even complete elementary school. That's what he says. He can't be a philosopher at the university, so he moved his philosophy courses first to a house in São Paulo, and then when he decided to move to the United States, he opened up this online philosophy course that, according to him, has some 5,000 students. And the idea of the philosophy course is to recreate Brazil's intellectual elite from scratch. So Olavo de Carvalho is very proud of being the mastermind, and he defines himself as the guru or whatever. Sometimes he says he's not, but basically he defines himself as the man who's going to recreate Brazil's cultural and intellectual elite. Nobody, or at least just a few people, actually knew Olavo de Carvalho prior to 2013. And the massive demonstrations of 2013 and on have allowed Olavo de Carvalho to become some sort of the face of the new right in Brazil, the face of the streets. So you see among many protesters in Brazil ever since 2013 signs such as Olavo is right, which in English means two things, which is quite fun, right? Olavo is right, he's far right sometimes. And he's got two best-selling books, We Deceive the Collective Imbecile, and the minimum you need to know not to be an idiot. And these are very catchy titles, and he's become a Brazilian best-selling author ever since 2014 because of these two books and because of all the political transformations Brazil has undergone ever since then. Now, Olavo de Carvalho has been able, and that's something that many people turn a blind eye to when analyzing Bolsonaro's cabinet, right? Olavo de Carvalho, he's gotten no votes whatsoever. He's been living in the United States for the last 15 years. And he's just a guru in the backstage. So he didn't even jump to the front to campaign for Bolsonaro during the 2018 elections. And in spite of that, in spite of having no votes at all, he was able to appoint a huge number of his followers and students to key positions in Bolsonaro's cabinet. So it's very common to see people defining themselves as an Olavo de Carvalho student. And these people are nowadays occupying places in the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Foreign Relations, the Ministry of Human Rights, and so on and so forth. So Olavismo, as I often call it, or Bolsolavismo, it has become a very strong ideology with a very strong grip on political power, right? So this is the architecture of Olavismo in Bolsonaro's cabinet. You have the inner circle of Olavo de Carvalho's students. who are represented by the Minister of Education, the Advisor for International Affairs, Felipe Martins, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Chairman of the House of Representatives Foreign Relations Committee, who happens to be Bolsonaro's third son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, Damares Alves, who's a latecomer in Olavo de Carvalho's philosophy course, but she now sometimes refers to Olavo de Carvalho as a teacher, and she's the Minister of Women, Family, and Human Rights. And Carlos Bolsonaro, who's a city councilor, but he's the informal manager of Bolsonaro's Twitter account, which has become a time bomb in some episodes of Bolsonaro's political trajectory ever since he became president, because Carlos Bolsonaro would tweet on Bolsonaro's behalf, and sometimes he would like commit crimes while tweeting. Commit crimes, I mean crimes of responsibility. For example, the day he, or Bolsonaro account, tweeted a video of a golden shower episode, for those who know what it means, which could be considered a crime of responsibility depending on how you look at it. And then we found out that it was Carlos Bolsonaro who kept tweeting these things just to shock people as part of this metapolitical or this cultural warfare. And then you have some other, there's the outer circle with some Congress people such as Carolina Stolle, Carlos Zambelli. Arthur Weintraub is a legal advisor. He's the younger brother of Abraham Weintraub. And Luis Felipe Bragança, who's also known as the Prince in Brazil because he's a pro-monarchy congressman. It makes no sense if you think about it deep down. But here's the thing: you can notice a pattern here. And I intentionally chose their Twitter avatars so you can the pattern. You see that some of them are like in a, I mean, the pictures are in a pinkish, bluish, like cyan tone. Does anybody know what that means? Okay. This is called vaporwave or flash wave aesthetics. And this has something to do with vintage electronic music of the 1990s. So it originally has no relationship with the alt-right, but the alt-right, especially in Brazil, decided to take on the vaporwave aesthetics as a form of signaling. So if I adopt a vaporwave aesthetics in my profile picture, for example, people know where I stand. And it's curious because it emerged as a very peripheral, very fringy aspect of Bolsonaro's supporters on Twitter. But then most of Bolsonaro's policymakers, especially the ones related to Olavo de Carvalho, adopted the same sorts of pictures. Which makes it very interesting because, I mean, they don't even pretend they are not radical, alt-right, whatever what they are. So you have this inner and outer circle of people who've been creating a number of narratives in Bolsonaro's administration. They are the masters of the ideological narrative of the government. You've probably heard of one of the last controversial episodes of Bolsonaro, which have to do with the Secretary of Culture, or the Minister of Culture of Brazil, Roberto Alvim, who was he still is a proud Olavo de Carvalho student as well. And he decided to push the boundary a little bit further, and he decided to announce an award of the Ministry of Culture dressed up as Joseph Goebbels, right? He's an actor, he's a theater director, so we could expect it to be just a prank, just a practical joke. But a lot of people took it very seriously, including some Jewish community institutions who immediately reacted to that, basically asking Bolsonaro to fire Roberto Alvim, and Bolsonaro did it. And because he did it very fast, I mean, it was a matter of hours before he got sacked, many of his supporters saw it as a sign of Bolsonaro's virtue. Bolsonaro he will not be tolerant with Nazis in the government. But we know that, as a matter of fact, if people hadn't paid attention to that, or if people hadn't realized that, as a matter of fact, he plagiarized Goebbels. It was not just the aesthetic resemblance. He used verbatim some passages of Goebbels' discourse on the arts, on the national arts, and so on and so forth, and even played Richard Wagner in the background of the video. So it was clearly and outspokenly Nazi, and this is why it became unsustainable. But if you think about it, and it's been happening to the United States too in some respects as well, what this ideological fringe of Bolsonaro's administration has been trying to do is to move what we call the Overton window. This is an expression that became popular under Trump. The idea that sometimes if you push your ideology to the extremes, you might find people accepting at least 3/4 of it, and that will be enough to basically reshape the political spectrum. And that's apparently what Bolsonaro's been trying to do. I'd say that his culture minister, secretary, he actually took a step too far on that, but I mean, many of his ministers and top-ranked officials have been pushing the boundaries of decency to the limits as well. And who's the creator? Who's the mastermind behind moving the Overton window to the extreme in the U.S.? It's a man called Steve Bannon. And it's no coincidence that Olavo de Carvalho and Steve Bannon, they've befriended each other. And they've been seen together a number of times in public events here in the United States. Even in Bolsonaro's trip to Washington, D.C. in last March, he put up a dinner, like a dinner in the embassy for very important guests, among whom were Olavo de Carvalho and Steve Bannon, who happened to sit on either side of Bolsonaro during the dinner. So that was quite telling. I mean, the idea that they are important because they are the ones forging the whole narrative. And you might find on Twitter, for example, you might find some pictures of Eduardo Bolsonaro and Steve Bannon, Felipe Martinez, the international advisor, who's just 31, and Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon's pretty much everywhere. And some people even say, for those of you who read Portuguese, that Bolsonaro's UN speech last September also had a consultancy of Bannon for some of the bits of it, especially the extreme nationalist bits. Now, what are the foreign policy implications of this new Brazil? So when you think about foreign policy, I'd say that one of the first things Bolsonaro did was to reshape Brazil's alliances across the world. Brazil has been known for its universalist foreign policy, which basically means that Brazil was very proud, at least up until 2018, successive Brazilian administrations would be very proud of being friends with pretty much everybody across the world. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Israel, doesn't matter. Lula, when he traveled to the Middle East for the last time in 2010, he traveled both to Israel and to Palestine. And it was a symbol of this sort of universalist perspective, the idea that Brazil wants to be friends with everybody. And that's, by the way, and I've written a lot about it, that's what makes Brazil a very special power, or a very special country when it comes to international relations. We see Brazil not as an ideological country, not as a very powerful country in terms of material resources, but Brazil has a very unique sort of soft power. The idea that Brazil is able to pretty much shake hands with everybody. And that's clearly changed, right? So now we see Bolsonaro at the center of a whole new conservative alliance, which pretty much involves, and this is something that Bolsonaro said nominally. He gave specific names to that. He said, I want to be friends with Hungary. I want to be friends with Poland. I want to be friends with Israel. So these are the actually the five countries Bolsonaro has been trying to get closer to. Hungary, Poland, Italy, especially under Matteo Salvini, who used to be the vice premier. Now he will be able to run for elections and he might get elected as a prime minister. And Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. And of course, at the center of his fetish with this new conservative group is Donald Trump. they have something in common, right? They have a lot of things in common, but I'd say that they are, out of all leaders of the world, they are very clearly right-wing, conservative populists, so to say, right? They have a lot more things in common, but I'd say that these features, they hold this group together. And curiously enough, if for those of you who know a little bit about Bannon's trajectory, you're going to see that Steve Bannon was the one to propose back in the day, back in 2018, that the conservative movement of the world should unite in form of an actual alliance. So he proposed ever since 2018 something that he himself called the movement, which is an alliance of conservative politicians and leaders across the world. And Bolsonaro, of course, was part of it. And that's what Araújo, in his inaugural speech in January last year, he basically said, "We admire those who fight for their country and who love themselves as a people." And he nominally cited Hungary, Poland, Israel, and the United States. He even wrote an article, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, he wrote a piece in Portuguese in 2017, a year before he was even known. It's called Trump in the West. And the key argument of his article is Trump is the only man who can save the West from itself, from its LGBT degeneration, from its anti-Christian identity, and so on and so forth. So, and Bannon, of course, has his fingerprints all over this sort of strategy. Now, who are the new enemies of Bolsonaro's foreign policy? So I'd say that we can narrow down the enemies as globalists on the one hand and socialists on the other hand. So he's been very often referring to his enemies as anti-globalist socialists. Sometimes these terms are even used interchangeably. And among the globalists, I'm not going to cite one by one, but you've probably seen a number of crises involving Bolsonaro's foreign policy, involving George Soros, who's become the number one enemy of some other leaders across the world, including Viktor Orban in Hungary, right? Who expelled the Soros, he kicked out the Soros University, the CU, from Budapest. And you see Bolsonaro very often criticizing the United Nations. He had this quarrel with Macron of France. He even criticized the appearance of Macron's wife publicly. He laughed at somebody posting a meme on his Facebook account. Greenpeace. He's charged Greenpeace with the Amazon fires and spilling oil along the Brazilian coast. Can you imagine that? I mean, people have found out that the oil that spilled along the Brazilian coast had to do with a Greek vessel or something like that was taking oil from Venezuela to the Middle East or something like that. It had nothing to do with Greenpeace, but the first reaction was to say Greenpeace is to blame. Greenpeace oil spills, you see? But again, on WhatsApp groups, on my family groups, this is the prevailing narrative. Greenpeace and the globalists and France and the United Nations and NGOs in general, human rights NGOs and so on. And then you have on the other side socialists. You're going to find a number of references to something that they call Foro de São Paulo, which is an actual organization of left-wing parties created in 1990, the widows of the fall of the Berlin Wall in Latin America. So they were fighting neoliberal governments that were just popping around Latin America. So they created this, the Foro de São Paulo. And Olavo de Carvalho, back in the 1990s, was the first man to say that the Foro de São Paulo was responsible for the election of many left-wing politicians across Latin America, and that it should be destroyed. Nobody took him seriously up until last year. And now the Brazilian government is in a struggle to destroy Foro de São Paulo. Even though most scholars, I'd say 99% of scholars, really think that Foro de São Paulo, even though it exists, it's not really relevant if you think about Latin American politics. I mean, for those of you who study Latin American politics, you see many waves of Latin American politics. I mean, the military dictatorship wave, and then the neoliberal wave, and then the left-wing wave in the early 2000s. But these processes, they are very unique from country to country. You don't see a pattern, and you can't blame it all on a single organization whose records and whose decisions are actually public. You can access them on the website and so on and so forth. So, of course, it's exaggeration. I'm not saying that there's no reason to fight Maduro, for example, who's a dictator. But on the other hand, it's very hard to blame it all on one organization, and that's what the government's been trying to do. And then again, it's not just conspiracy theory, it's on their Twitter accounts. They've been posting about Ford São Paulo, how we have to destroy it, and so on and so forth. And of course, socialists, they have to do with Maduro's Venezuela, but they also have to do with China, and sometimes even with Iran. Which leads me to a question or a point, which is the following. I'm almost done. Sometimes I have the feeling that Brazil is not fighting its own real enemies, but sometimes it gets to be fighting America's enemies, for example, because Bolsonaro loves Trump so much. He accepts, he wants to take up a fight with Iran, which pretty much makes no sense at all from the Brazilian perspective. We have nothing to do with Iran. We actually sell a lot of corn to Iran. They are our top corn importers. We sell a lot of halal meat to Iran. And it leads us to a paradox, which is there's so many agribusiness people in the Bolsonaro administration. And they are just crazy about this kind of ideological debates because they think he might hurt Brazil's trade capacity, which is pretty much true. And this is a tweet by John Bolton, former National Security Advisor. When Bolsonaro left the United States in March last year, he said, "We're proud to make Brazil a major non-NATO ally and look forward to working with them on Venezuela, Iran, and China. A great meeting with a great partner." Trump didn't tweet about Bolsonaro's visit, which is quite curious because he tweets about pretty much everything. But Bolton tweeted about it. And then again, when you look at it, Iran has nothing to do with Brazil. Venezuela, I understand why Brazil's trying to fight Venezuela for reasons that include security and everything. Venezuela has gone on default of Brazilian debts, of debts that they had with Brazil. But for example, China. China has been our largest trade partner ever since 2009. It makes no sense to make China an enemy or to antagonize China. So that's becoming pretty dangerous even from the government's perspective. So their members of the government were actually quite anxious about all these things. And this is a part of Bolsonaro's speech at the United Nations. We are not here to erase nationalities and sovereignties in the name of an abstract global interest. This is not the Global Interest Organization, it is the United Nations organization, and so it must remain. You can see Bannon's inference here. The idea that there is nationalism and then there's globalism, and the United Nations represents globalist ideas, so we have to bring it back to national sovereignties and so on and so forth. Which in our case, as I said, has a lot to do with the idea of religion as well, so that's the whole. Now, finally, what are the risks of this new Brazilian identity? What are the risks of translating these religious nationalist ideas to actual politics, transform them into the mainstream of Brazilian politics? The first risk, from my perspective, who study foreign policy, is a risk to Brazil's global standing, right? As I told you before, Brazil has a long-standing diplomatic tradition that revolves around three pillars: multilateralism, universalism, the idea of being friends with everybody, and pacifism. And Bolsonaro, with his metapolitical struggle, has been confronting these three pillars all at a time. The New Brazil doesn't like multilateralism because it's globalist. The New Brazil doesn't like universalism because we have to be friends only with those with whom we have something in common, especially religion. So the idea of international Christian front and so on and so forth. And we are even willing to wage war, and it's not cultural war anymore, it's actual war on whoever challenges our positions. So, and of course Venezuela in this case is the most important target. So some members of the Bolsonaro cabinet, not all to be sure, have even suggested the possibility of invading Venezuela, because after all we have to do a regime change. You've heard before, right? So regime change and all these things, they've become part of our repertoire of foreign policy, which is staggering, because this has nothing to do with, we haven't been at war in the last 140 years. So it makes no sense to think about it in these terms. And I don't even think we are powerful enough to wage a war on anybody. When Dilma Rousseff was the president of Brazil back in 2014, I think, she sacked one of the generals of her cabinet. And he went to a newspaper, I don't know which exactly, saying that he was, of course, he was enraged at this situation. And he basically gave an interview saying Brazil has no ammunition to wage a war on Bolivia for even half an hour. I mean, that's the whole point. What's the point of doing away with pacifism? If pacifism not only has defined us as a country, but also we need pacifism because we have no resources at all. Now, there's an obvious risk, and that's where the cabinet starts to fighting each other within the cabinet. There's a very clear risk to Brazil's capacity to recover economically, because it will hurt trade, or it can hurt trade, right? The discussions on Iran point out to this direction. I mean, why are we waging war? Why are we following Trump's steps on Iran if we have nothing to do with the U.S.-Iranian struggle? We have no stakes in the geopolitics of the Middle East. Eduardo Bolsonaro, the congressman, who's also very much engaged in foreign policy, he said that one of the priorities of Brazil for 2020 is to label Hezbollah, the Shia movement in Lebanon, as a terrorist group. And this is also a problem when it comes to the Brazilian diplomatic tradition, because we, by tradition, only consider terrorist groups groups that are considered as such by the United Nations. And Hezbollah is a discussion whether it's a terrorist group or a political party that does terrorism when it comes to Israel. And these things are blurred. But then again, you have seen a number of discussions involving what's going to be the future of Brazil-China relations. Because some members of the Brazilian cabinet have been demonizing China so much. What's the future of Brazil-Argentina relations? Because Brazil and Argentina, they together have founded the condominium. Is that a word? Condominum?
Not really. Sort of agreement or
the agreement or the groundwork of South America's regional integration. Right? So it makes no sense to destroy relationship with our relationship with Argentina just because the new Argentinian president is a left-wing leader, whose first foreign trip is just happening right as we speak. It was to Israel. So that's quite telling too. Countries, irrespective of the president's ideology, tend to be very pragmatic when it comes to international relations, and that's precisely what's not happening to Brazil. And finally, Arab and Muslim countries. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I don't want to talk a lot about it. Maybe Q&A will let us explore this a little bit further. There's a risk to democracy. Conveying globalism and socialism often involves the elimination of the other. That's based on Metapolitics and Paul Schmidt. So socialists, human rights, environment activists, professors, teachers, liberals, and the list is becoming longer and longer, and anyone really who opposes Bolsonaro's ideology. So some members of the cabinet, sometimes Bolsonaro himself does it too, they are preaching the destruction of the enemy, not the antagonism or the opposition, the actual destruction. And this might lead to the partial or total collapse of Bolsonaro's political support. And since we have this coalition-based government in Brazil, so it might damage his governing capacity for the next 3 years. And of course, if Bolsonaro is not able to govern with Congress, he will probably move on to a more extremist and authoritarian posture. It can boost extremism and authoritarian sentiments in the government and will further deeper polarization. That's it. Thank you very much.
We have a bit of a constraint on our time in the room, so we only have about 15 minutes, and so I thought perhaps what we could do is have, say, 5 people who have questions or comments. Try to state your questions or comments as briefly as you can, and then we'll give Guilherme a chance to respond, and then if there's more time, we'll take another round of people to speak. Yes.
I have 2 questions actually, and I'll try to make them as brief as possible. So, in the beginning you said that, you know, right now he has 30% approval. This has been going down since the beginning of his presidency. You know, I guess my question is, part of what got him over the edge in the election to 55% was precisely the support of the country's elite that thought, you know, Paul Guedes is going to be the president, basically, and you know, he's just the figurehead, and we're going to be able to contain him. And my question is, if, you know, the crazy Olavistas flat earthers people, if they keep, you know, straining relations with China, with the Middle East, with Argentina, and ruining the economy, basically, and basically not allowing Brazil to recover economically, these people are probably not going to support him in 2022. They're going to pick another voice. And so my first question is, what is his road to re-election if this ideology gets in the way of basically getting Brazil out of this crisis and maintaining the support of the people who got him over the edge in the election? Right. And then my second question is about the collapse of democracy, basically. I think there has been a lot of kind of rumors about the military, of course, not supporting a coup, and you know, that would ruin their kind of institutional like standing in the government. And you know, even when Bolsonaro, for example, has mentioned like, oh, let's invade Venezuela, Moro was like, absolutely not, we're not going to involve the military in anything. And so, what, you know, I mean, this is obviously an impossible question to answer, but like, what are the chances that if Bolsonaro were to say, you know, oh, I'm going to govern without Congress, why is it just the military would actually get behind that and close Congress and close the SDF and establish a dictatorship if, you know, right now there's clearly no institutional support for that?
4 more. In the back, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. At the beginning, or towards the beginning, you said that the Brazilian alt-right, in contrast to the American alt-right, does not really have an avowed white supremacism. And I want to question that a little bit and ask, what do you see with regards to the alt-right on the online circles and the opposition to the affirmative action programs? And I think that there are a lot of overlaps between those online milieus, especially, and then also how the anti-corruption discourse is also a racial discourse in Brazil, I think, with regards to like vagabundagem and like oba and things like that, that clearly are associated to racial figures and to sort of disorder associated with blackness. And so maybe it's not as avowed as in American alt-right terms, but I would think that it's an important aspect of the rise of Bolsonaro in more general perspective. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thanks for the great lecture. Bolsonaro is trying to create a new political party. He has left the party, he's trying to create a new political party. My question is, how do you think this new party fits into this quest for a new Brazilian identity?
Let's see, 2 more. It's here.
As far as conservative alliance is going, I just want to know if there's been, like, historically, if there's been other times where conservative leaders united together, and then if right now, if there's any possibility that the same thing is happening with left-wing, liberal, progressive alliance happening right now, if you're aware of anything going on.
Final question before I give you a chance.
Thank you, Professor Guilherme, for the presentation. So my question is, as you stated earlier in the presentation, there's a differentiation between this kind of evangelical narrative, that this all-encompassing, more conservative narrative that's sort of been substantiating the local mobilization of like Christian groups.
Yeah.
But I find that there's like a kind of paradoxical relationship in terms of like how Christians have voted in the past 15 years. In large part, Mercedes and a lot of these other big Christian leaders have mobilized for the Workers' Party and the leftist government. In fact, more examples of that is like the two women that were involved in Juma's government, which was Marina and the name of the other, but both evangelical. Yes, both evangelical women of color. But then there's this huge shift where they won the election for Bolsonaro. So I was wondering if you could speak on that.
So that's more than any human being could actually respond to in 5 minutes, but take your shot at it.
Okay, so yeah, I'll follow the order. Thank you for your questions. Those are great questions. First of all, I also thought that the economic group, the economic elite of the country would just take over as Bolsonaro became so much ideological, but that was not what's happened. Of course, there were pacts, there were concessions here and there. I think that China is the greatest concession. But we have, for example, and there will be a friend of mine, Oliver Stunkel. He came here a couple of months ago, and he's just published a piece for America's Quarterly in which he says that the 5G, the Brazilian 5G, will be the battlefield of China-U.S. trade and technology war. So obviously, China is a major concession made to the liberals of the country, and also the agribusiness groups. But so far, I'd say that the government is becoming more and more ideological when it comes to foreign policy and even education and human rights, which is curious because I would think otherwise. I think that somehow both the military and the liberals would try to modulate the government's ideology, but that's not what we see, especially when it comes to foreign policy. I also wrote about it. I can share the piece I wrote for America's Quarterly as well. On the concessions, but on the prevailing role of the government's ideologues when it comes to foreign policy. I don't know what to expect for 2020. And my hunch is if Trump wins re-election, if Netanyahu remains in power in Israel, the ideologues of the government will become very, very powerful and perhaps even hegemonic at some point. And it could affect Bolsonaro's 2022 campaign, but I'd say that up until then, well, there are ways for economic recovery. I don't know exactly how, but there are ways. So we may be on better economic grounds by 2022. So it might be a game changer. We have to pay attention to what's going to happen to the mayor elections this year as well. But I'd say that the most important element is how Trump and Netanyahu will be able to hold on to power. So that's going to be the sense. The military have been kicked out of the core decision-making group, right? In the beginning, we also thought that the military could exert some sort of pressure. In the beginning, Mourão spoken openly against moving Brazil's embassy to Jerusalem, against hostilizing China, and all those other things. But ever since Santos Cruz, General Santos Cruz, was sacked in June last year, I say that the military have become a fringy, very weak group within the government. And you can even see in the second rank of the government officials, military men have been replaced by Olavistas. And that's been the pattern for the last couple of months. Now, I totally agree with the idea that there is a very strong racist component to Bolsonaro's policies too. But as you said, it's not openly racist. They try to formulate it in a religious tone more than in a racial tone. So I understand your point, and I agree with that. It's racist too, especially affirmative action debates and debates on favelas and cidadãos de bem and crime and so on and so forth. But I'd say that the underlying narrative is predominantly Christian. The idea of cidadãos de bem has a Christian tone to that, which is very, very powerful. And that's what resonated with many Brazilians. I mean, my own father-in-law we talk a lot about it, and he says we have to pray for Bolsonaro. When Bolsonaro got stabbed before the elections, he said it's even a biblical passage. He bled for thee. There was a need. Now, I forgot to mention the party, the new party that Bolsonaro is building as we speak, the Alliance for Brazil. There's a very interesting commentary in Folha de São Paulo about it. There's this journalist, Fábio Zanini, who covers right-wing politics in Brazil, and he compared the platforms of the Arena Party of the military dictatorship of 1966 and the Alliance for Brazil platform. And he says, this party now is way more radical and way more ideological, and mostly because of its religious overtones. So religion plays a decisive role in the construction of this narrative of the new Brazil that is also in the party program. So it's worth checking. Are you Brazilian? Yeah.
Yes.
So you can just read the Portuguese version of it. It's really staggering. But yeah. Do we have any other examples of conservative alliances in history? Well, we have had ideological alliances during the Cold War, for example. But it's hard to tell whether ideological alliances of the Cold War were fundamentally ideological or geopolitical in nature. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with international relations jargons, I'm not sure if what happened during the Cold War was, in fact, a realist understanding of who should I take sides with. So the Soviet bloc and then the non-aligned movement and so on and so forth. The thing here is that Brazil's trying to build an alliance with the United States on ideological, on conservative grounds, and that challenges our pragmatic considerations about what's good for Brazil in terms of power, or in terms of the economy, or in terms of trade. So that's the thing. And whenever asked, Foreign Minister Ernesto Araújo says, I understand all the fuzz about China, but we have to rebuild Brazil's identity first. This is clearly metapolitical, right? The idea that culture comes before any other political considerations. And finally, evangelical support. I can't just sum it up in 2 minutes, but I'd say that that evangelical voters, they were longing for somebody who spoke on their behalf. And they voted for Lula because Lula was the closest approximation of what they were looking for at that moment, mostly because sometimes, or most of the time, people vote with their pockets, right? So it was an economic consideration. Lula has taken so many people out of poverty. Most evangelicals, they come from lower classes, so they rewarded Lula with the national elections. But there are many people studying the patterns of evangelical voting in Brazil, and they claim that there's something very interesting about this, that they voted for Lula for president, but they voted for their local pastors for Congress. And this is obviously contradictory because these pastors, they do not really preach the same things Lula preached as a left-wing champion, right? So Lula had to form a pact with them. When it comes to foreign policy, for example, I've been working on that recently. Lula gave the big evangelical churches in Brazil full access to diplomatic passports. So you want to preach in Africa, there you go, a passport. So you can go there and preach. So I don't mess with your businesses. You don't mess with our ideological platform. So it was an appeasement act, right? And it worked for quite some time. Now, I'd say that because of political polarization, especially after 2013, evangelicals slowly moved to a more consistent platform and to giving a more consistent support to candidates. They mostly supported Aécio Neves in 2014. I can give you the figures later, and they massively voted for Bolsonaro in 2018, and I'd say 70 to 75% of evangelicals voted for Bolsonaro. It's not the same for Catholics, for example. Right? Now, just a final thing. I would just add that in spite of evangelical voters, they correspond to 30% of Brazil, right, nowadays. But in spite of their political power and in spite of their numbers, Catholics, and particularly fundamentalist Catholics, are the ones to set the narrative. The metapolitical game, which is often translated by Olavo de Carvalho, is something created by Catholic fundamentalists. Because Catholic fundamentalists, and they have this relationship with the traditional family property, TFP movement from the 1960s. They were behind the military coup d'etat in 1964. And they are, I'd say, the invisible force that shapes this narrative. And one of the most visible elements of this Catholic fundamentalism in Brazil is their pro-monarchy positions. I'm not saying that everybody who supports the monarchy is a Catholic fundamentalist. What I'm saying is one of the elements of the Catholic, the fundamentalist Catholic narrative is the idea that the origins of Brazil lie in the great discoveries, in the role of Jesuits, and in King Peter II, or whatever, the Brazilian Empire, which was a Catholic empire, by the way. And the Republic came and they did away with all the religious things. So it's anti-Republican to some extent, which is quite interesting.
Well, I wish that we had another hour because I know there are lots and lots of other comments that people have. I just wanted to make one last comment, which is that I would guess that practically everybody here who follows Brazil has known for a while how they feel about Bolsonaro. But one of the things that I particularly admire about this presentation is that it really involves expanding what we know about Bolsonaro and a willingness to cross into the depths of something that many of us might find offensive or repugnant or difficult to think about, and really figure out why it works in the way that it does. And I think that that kind of thinking can really help us to advance the conversation and ultimately make how we feel about it a much more effective thing in the world. And so we're grateful for that insight.
Thank you so much.